I never thought a routine apartment inspection could turn into one of the most confusing nights of my life, but here we are. So picture this. It's a Wednesday evening, and I'm just minding my own business, half watching some late-night TV, when there's a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My landlord usually sends a text days in advance, but standing there was this guy I'd never seen before. Tall, neat, with this kind of sharp, confident vibe that made me feel instantly off balance. He introduced himself as the new property manager, which I figured was just corporate speak for the guy who's about to nitpick every corner of my place. Fair enough. I swung the door open wider, trying to mask how curious I was. His name was Ethan, and honestly, he looked way too put together for this job. Usually, these inspections are handled by guys who wear stained polos and have zero social skills. Ethan was different. Like he stepped out of a business magazine rather than a property management office. I lived in this tiny one-bedroom apartment in a pretty average neighborhood. Nothing glamorous, but it was home. Cheap rent, decent enough space, and a balcony I'd convinced myself was a good spot to grow herbs. I was halfway through my 20s, working a meh office job, and not exactly killing it socially, so my apartment was my little zone of control. Ethan stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, which was a little weird, but I guess that's how these inspections go. What caught me off guard was the way he looked around. Not just scanning for broken blinds or chipped paint, but actually looking like the place was a puzzle to be solved, or maybe a secret to be uncovered. He moved toward the kitchen, running his fingers casually over the counter, then paused by the shelf where I kept some books and old vinyl records. He turned back to me with this half smile, the kind that makes you wonder if someone's about to drop a joke or something more serious. Honestly, I was a little flustered. There was something about him, something about the way he looked at me, that was way more than just landlord checking on the state of the premises. I tried to keep it professional, saying, "Everything's good here. No leaks, no bugs, no complaints." But Ethan's eyes didn't leave mine. Then he said something that totally threw me off. "I'm not just here to check the apartment, you know." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "Yeah? What else would you be here for?" He stepped closer just a few inches and whispered, "Maybe a little more than rent." At that moment, I realized this wasn't going to be your usual boring inspection. And honestly, I had no idea if I should be intrigued or just shut the door and pretend I wasn't home. But instead of walking away, I found myself leaning in a bit, unable to look away. And just like that, the night that started as a simple landlord visit turned into something I couldn't have predicted, and I'm still not sure where it's going. I probably should have backed away right then and there. I mean, who does that? Shows up unannounced, inspects your place, and then drops a line like that? But instead, I just stood there, feeling like I'd stepped into some weird movie scene I wasn't prepared for. Ethan's eyes held this intensity that made it hard to think straight, and honestly, I was kind of curious what he meant. "More than rent?" I repeated, voice a little shaky. He shrugged, his half-smile still playing on his lips. "Yeah, I don't usually do this, but there's something about your place, or maybe you. I don't know. It's not just the job tonight." I blinked, trying to process what the hell he was saying. Was he flirting? Was this some sort of weird power move? Part of me wanted to shut the door and call it a night, but another part, probably the part that's been starved for a little excitement, was intrigued enough to ask, "Okay, so what am I supposed to say?" Ethan laughed softly, and it was the kind of laugh that sounded genuine, not mocking. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not trying to make this uncomfortable. Just, maybe I'm looking for something different. Something real." That caught me off guard. Property managers aren't usually in the market for something real, right? Usually they just want to make sure you haven't trashed the place or have some sort of illegal pet. I motioned toward the couch, suddenly realizing we'd been standing awkwardly in the middle of my living room. "Want to sit?" I asked, because why not? At this point, the night was already weirdly out of my control. Ethan nodded, following me as I pulled out the couch a bit to make room. We sat down facing each other, and something about the closeness made me hyper-aware of the small space between us, like the air itself was charged. "So tell me about you," he said, leaning back casually but still watching me carefully. I ran a hand through my hair, the nerves kicking in a bit. "Not much to tell. I work in marketing, mostly behind the scenes. Pretty dull, honestly. Mostly, I binge-watch shows, avoid social events, and try not to burn the kitchen down when I cook." I smiled, trying to keep the mood light. He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you have a pretty low-key life." "Yeah, that's one way to put it," I said. "What about you?" "You don't strike me as the property manager type, if that's what you actually are." Ethan chuckled. "Fair. I got into the business because it pays the bills, but my real passion is photography. I travel a bit when I can, shoot landscapes mostly. I guess I'm the guy who looks for beauty in the everyday. That kind of surprised me." It was the first time tonight he'd said something that felt genuine, not just a line or a casual comment. We fell into a kind of easy conversation after that, the initial awkwardness fading. He asked about my favorite movies, my taste in music, stuff that usually feels like small talk, but somehow felt more intimate now. I found myself opening up about the little things I liked about my apartment. The way the light hits the balcony in the morning, how I had a stack of vinyl records I never really play but liked having around. At some point, Ethan looked down at the records and grinned. "Fleetwood Mac? Good choice." I laughed. "Yeah, I'm a bit of a classic rock nerd." He nodded. "I get that. I like to think everyone has that one thing that grounds them." That hit close to home. My mind flashed to all the times I felt a bit lost, disconnected, like I was just going through the motions. Maybe that's why Ethan's presence felt so different, like he wasn't just another passing face. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "So, do you ever wish for more? I mean, more than just rent or small talk or the usual?" I paused. It was a heavy question, but it didn't feel heavy when he asked it. More like honest. I shrugged, not sure how to answer. "Sometimes. I guess it's easy to get stuck in a routine. I've always thought love was something people find in stories, not in real life." Ethan's eyes softened. "Maybe that's because you haven't found the right person yet." There was a moment where everything felt suspended. The noise of the city outside, the hum of the air conditioner, even the flickering TV in the background. I looked at him and saw something that I couldn't quite name, but knew was important. Then, just as I was about to say something, anything, the sound of my phone buzzing broke the spell. I glanced down. It was a text from my best friend, checking if I was coming out this weekend. I smiled to myself. Maybe I should say yes. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for life to come to me. Ethan stood up, straightening his jacket. "Well, I should get going. Thanks for letting me in. Not just the apartment, but, you know." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread in my chest. "Yeah, thanks for stopping by." He hesitated at the door, then turned back. "If you ever want to talk more about records, life, or whatever, I'm just a message away." And with that, he was gone into the night, leaving me standing there with a mix of questions and something dangerously close to hope. I closed the door, leaned back against it, and just sat there for a while, wondering if this was the start of something unexpected. Because honestly, after tonight, I didn't want to go back to the usual routine. Not anymore. The next morning, it felt surreal when I woke up with Ethan's words still echoing in my head. I kept thinking about that look in his eyes when he said he wanted more than rent. Like he wasn't just doing his job, like he was actually interested and tried. And honestly, I don't think I'd felt that way in a long time. Wanted and seen, not just glanced at or ignored. Of course, I tried to brush it off when I got ready for work. I mean, he was just the property manager, right? Probably shouldn't read too much into a weird moment during an inspection. But even as I showered, made coffee, and scrolled through emails, my mind kept drifting back to him. I found myself checking my phone more than usual, half expecting a message from him. Nothing. And that was okay. I told myself it was probably better that way. But when my phone buzzed that afternoon, my heart jumped. A text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Ethan. Just checking in. Hope everything's good with the apartment." I grinned like a total idiot and quickly typed back, "All good here. Thanks for asking." That little exchange felt like the start of something, even if I wasn't sure what. Over the next few days, we texted back and forth. Nothing heavy, just casual stuff about music, the neighborhood, and the occasional joke. It was nice, relaxed. Different from the usual awkward small talk I had with people. One night, after a few days of chatting, Ethan sent me a message that said, "Feel like grabbing a coffee? I owe you for the surprise inspection." I almost deleted it, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it, but then I figured why not. So I replied, "Sure, let's do it." We agreed to meet at this little coffee shop a few blocks from my place. I showed up a little early, nervously adjusting my jacket and trying to act like I wasn't about to meet a guy who just turned my world upside down. When Ethan walked in, he smiled that same confident, warm smile that had me hooked from the start. He waved me over like we were old friends catching up, not strangers who'd met under awkward circumstances. We grabbed coffee and sat outside on the small patio. The night air was cool but comfortable, with the faint hum of the city around us. We talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations that somehow make time fly without you noticing. I told him about my job, the boring meetings, the weird office politics. He shared stories from his travels, the strange places he'd photographed, and the people he'd met along the way. There was an ease between us, like we'd known each other longer than just a week. At some point, he asked, "Have you ever thought about doing something crazy? Like, just packing up and going somewhere new?" I laughed, shaking my head. I'm more of a stick to what I know kind of guy, but sometimes, yeah, it crosses my mind. Ethan looked thoughtful. Maybe you just haven't found the right reason yet. That made me pause. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been stuck in my comfort zone for too long, afraid to take risks or open myself up. The night ended too soon, as these things tend to do. But before we parted, Ethan surprised me again. "Want to see some of my photos?" he asked. We moved to a nearby park bench, and he pulled out his phone, swiping through shots of distant mountains, vibrant city streets, and quiet moments he'd captured with his camera. The images were stunning, but what really caught my attention was how passionate he was talking about them. I realized then there was more to Ethan than just a property manager with a sharp suit. He was someone chasing a dream, someone who saw the world differently. Over the next few weeks, our friendship deepened. Ethan started dropping by more often, sometimes just to say hi, sometimes bringing coffee or some new record he thought I'd like. We shared late-night talks, cooked dinner together, or tried to, and slowly, I started feeling like I wasn't just living day to day, but actually experiencing life. One night, after a long walk through the city's quiet streets, we stopped at a bridge overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and there was a calmness in the air. Ethan looked at me and said, "I'm glad I came to inspect your apartment that night." I smiled, feeling something stir inside me. Me too. Then, without a word, he reached out and took my hand. It was the kind of moment I'd dreamed about but never thought would happen to me. The surprise wasn't just in the gesture. It was in what it meant. That maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let someone in. And as we stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the city, I realized that the inspection wasn't just about the apartment. It was about opening a door to something new, something real. Holding Ethan's hand on that bridge, I felt like the world had shifted just a little, enough to make me dizzy, but in a good way. It was weird to admit, but I hadn't really been touched like that in a while, not in a way that wasn't rushed or awkward. This felt different, slow, comfortable. Like maybe he wasn't just some random guy who showed up to inspect my apartment. Maybe he was someone who could actually stick around. We stood there for a while, neither of us saying much, just watching the city lights ripple on the water below. Eventually, Ethan squeezed my hand gently and said, "So what happens now?" I shrugged but smiled. Honestly, I don't know, but I want to find out. He grinned, that same easy smile that made me want to know everything about him. Good answer. After that night, things between us started to naturally evolve. Ethan wasn't the type to rush or push. He just showed up. Sometimes with a new record he'd picked up, sometimes with a fresh bag of coffee from his favorite roastery. It was small stuff, but it meant a lot. After months of living pretty quietly, I was suddenly looking forward to his visits more than I expected. One Saturday, Ethan invited me out to this little art gallery downtown. He said there was an exhibit by a local photographer he admired, and I figured it was a chance to see his world a little more up close. The gallery was this cozy converted loft with exposed brick and high ceilings. Definitely not my usual scene, but I was glad to be there. We wandered through the rooms, Ethan explaining some of the pieces with the kind of passion I hadn't seen from many people outside of their own work. I remember stopping in front of one black and white photo of an empty street in the rain. It had this eerie, lonely feeling, but also something beautiful about it. "You see the mood, right?" Ethan asked, watching my reaction. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. It's like the city's waiting for something, or someone." He smiled thoughtfully. "Exactly. Sometimes the quiet moments say the most." That night, walking back to my place, we talked about dreams and regrets, about what we wanted and what scared us. I told him about my fear of getting stuck, of never really living. He told me about how photography helped him look beyond the surface, find the extraordinary in the ordinary. When we got to my apartment, Ethan hesitated at the door. "Can I be honest?" he said. "Always," I replied. He looked down for a moment, then met my eyes. "I'm not just a property manager or some guy passing through. I want more than just casual visits or texts. I want to be part of your life, if you'll have me." I felt my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to run. The idea of opening up like that had always been terrifying. But another part, the part that had been quietly hoping, wanted to say yes. "I want that too," I said, finally. And just like that, everything shifted. We started dating properly, taking the slow but steady steps toward something real. Ethan's presence in my life was like sunlight after a long winter. Warm, unexpected, and hard to ignore. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was ready for this kind of connection. I worried about what people would think, about the past baggage I carried around without even realizing it. Ethan was patient. More patient than I deserved. He never pushed me, but never let me slip away either. One evening, a few months in, we were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I'd made some stupid joke about how I was probably the worst cook in the world, and Ethan laughed so hard I thought he might cry. Then he looked at me with this serious expression and said, "You know, I was scared the first time I came here. Not because of the inspection, but because I didn't know if you'd want anything to do with me." I leaned back, surprised by how vulnerable he sounded. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're kind but guarded. You don't let people in easily." "I get that. I'm the same way." I smiled softly. "Maybe that's why we work." He reached over and took my hand again, fingers interlacing with mine. "Yeah, I think so." That moment felt like a turning point. Something quiet but powerful. The kind of connection you don't always find. But when you do, it's worth holding on to. As the weeks turned into months, we built a life together. Little routines, inside jokes, plans for future adventures. Ethan showed me parts of the city I'd never seen, introduced me to his favorite coffee spots, and even helped me coax a few herbs into growing on my balcony. One night, as we were curled up on the couch listening to a Fleetwood Mac record, his choice this time, Ethan looked over and said, "I came here to inspect your apartment, but I stayed because I wanted more than just rent." I smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle deep inside me. Me too. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes from here. It's funny how life throws you curveballs when you least expect it. I mean, Ethan showing up to inspect my apartment was already wild enough, but what followed? Way beyond anything I'd imagined. And now, sitting here on my couch with him next to me, I'm thinking about how much things have changed, and how they keep changing. A few weeks after that balcony conversation, Ethan and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, dinners, playlists, and those quiet moments where words weren't needed. But then, one chilly Friday evening, Ethan suggested we do something different. "Let's get out of the city for a bit," he said over dinner as he poked at his pasta. "I know a place upstate. Small cabin, great hiking trails, and no cell service for miles. I hesitated. The idea of unplugging sounded amazing, but part of me was nervous. What if it felt awkward? What if the silence between us wasn't as easy, without the distractions of city noise? But Ethan's eyes lit up when he talked about it, and I remembered how photography was his passion, how he saw beauty in quiet spaces. So I said yes. The weekend trip turned out to be exactly what we didn't know we needed. The drive was mostly quiet, save for Ethan pointing out stretches of countryside or sharing stories from past trips. When we arrived, the cabin was small but cozy. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and windows that framed the forest like a painting. That night, after a fire crackled and we'd cooked a simple meal together, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. The stars were so bright, I could hardly believe it wasn't a planetarium. Ethan turned to me, voice low. You ever think about what comes next? Like, not just the next day or month, but the real future? I looked out at the trees, swaying gently in the night wind. Honestly, I wasn't sure I even wanted to think that far ahead before you showed up. He smiled softly. Good thing I'm here then. That moment felt heavy with possibility. I knew there were parts of me that still held back, still worried about the unknown. But there was also this growing feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could trust someone enough to imagine a future with them. The next morning, we went hiking on one of the trails Ethan had raved about. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. At the summit, we stood overlooking a valley drenched in sunlight, and Ethan took out his camera. Watching him, I realized how much passion he poured into his work, and how lucky I was to witness that. Want to take a shot? He asked, handing me the camera. I hesitated. It felt strange holding something he cared about so much, but I lifted the camera and tried to frame the perfect shot. Ethan stood behind me, gently guiding my hands. Relax. It's not about perfection. It's about what catches your eye. I looked through the viewfinder, focusing on the way the sunlight hit the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt connected to the world, to Ethan, to something bigger than myself. When I finally lowered the camera, he smiled. See? You've got an eye for this. Back at the cabin, that night felt different. We talked openly about fears, hopes, old wounds, and new dreams. I told him about the times I felt like I was just surviving, not really living. He listened without judgment, and that made all the difference. A few days later, we returned to the city, but something had shifted. The distance between us felt smaller, the connection stronger. But real life has a way of complicating things. A couple weeks after we got back, I noticed Ethan's demeanor change. He was quieter, more distracted. When I asked what was wrong, he brushed it off, saying work was hectic. But I could tell there was something else. One evening, after a late dinner, I finally pressed him. Ethan, talk to me. What's going on? He sighed, running his hands through his hair. I've been offered a photography gig abroad. A big one. It's everything I've wanted, but it means leaving, well, everything here. I felt my stomach drop. How long? 6 months, maybe more. It's a major opportunity. I wanted to be supportive. I really did, but part of me panicked. What did that mean for us? For the life we'd started building, Ethan reached for my hand. I don't want to lose what we have, but I can't pass this up. We spent the night talking through it. Fears, hopes, doubts. It wasn't easy, but we agreed to try, to make it work, no matter the distance. In the weeks leading up to his departure, we squeezed in as much time together as possible. Late night talks, exploring new parts of the city, quiet mornings with coffee on the balcony. The night before he left, we stood outside my apartment, wrapped in a hug that felt like it was trying to hold on to time itself. I'm going to miss this, Ethan whispered. Me too, I said, voice thick. He pulled back, looking into my eyes. No matter what happens, you changed my life. You made me believe in more than just rent. I smiled, tears threatening. And you made me believe in us. As he walked away, I realized that sometimes love isn't about certainty. It's about taking the leap, even when the future is unknown. And maybe that's the real inspection. Opening your heart and hoping someone chooses to stay. The apartment felt emptier than ever after Ethan left. I kept expecting him to walk through the door, that familiar, confident smile lighting up the room, but the silence kept reminding me he wasn't there. The first few days were a blur. Work, sleep, repeat. But my mind was constantly flickering back to him, to the last moments we shared. We promised to keep in touch, of course. We somehow managed to carve out time despite the 6-hour time difference. Video calls, late-night texts, the occasional voice message where we tried not to sound too lonely. It was weird learning to navigate a relationship stretched across miles and time zones, but we were determined. One night, about a week after Ethan left, I caught myself staring at my phone, waiting for his name to pop up. When it finally did, my heart did a little flip. "Hey, miss me yet?" his message read. I smiled, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Every day. You?" "Same here." This new city is amazing, but it's not home. Not without you. I felt warmth spread through me, but also this sharp pang of longing. It was hard, knowing he was out there, living his dream, but not here with me. Our video calls became lifelines. I'd watch him excitedly talk about his photo shoots, the new people he was meeting, the strange foods he tried. And I'd tell him about the mundane stuff. Work struggles, my failed attempts at cooking, the new book I started. We laughed, shared secrets, even argued a bit over who'd win in a hypothetical trivia contest. Spoiler, he'd win. But the distance gnawed at me. There were moments when I'd reach for my phone to send him a message, only to remind myself it was 3 a.m. where he was. I missed the simple things, the way his hand felt in mine, his laugh echoing in my living room, the way he always knew exactly which record to put on. Then came the day Ethan surprised me. Out of nowhere, he sent a text that said, "I'm coming home for a weekend. Pack your favorite clothes." I couldn't believe it. I had been counting down the days until he'd be back, but wasn't expecting it so soon. That weekend felt like a dream. We spent every second together. Late night walks, cooking dinner. Okay, he mostly cooked. Binge watching shows and curling up on the couch like no time had passed. On the last night, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights, Ethan turned to me and said, "You know, this whole long-distance thing is tough, but it's made me realize how much I want to be part of your everyday." I nodded, heart pounding. "Same here. I don't want to just be a chapter in your life while you chase dreams somewhere else." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Then maybe it's time to make some plans. Together." We talked through what that might look like. Me visiting him returning sooner, maybe even thinking long-term about living in the same city again. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of unknowns, but the thought of building a life together was thrilling. After Ethan left that weekend, things felt different, more hopeful. I started planning a trip to visit him, finding ways to make the distance feel less like a barrier and more like a test we were willing to pass. One night, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I stumbled across some shots Ethan took during his last visit. The candid moments, the silly faces, the quiet smiles. I realized how much I cherished not just him, but the life we were crafting. Then came a call that changed everything. Ethan's voice was breathless, excited. "I got the job. Permanently. They want me to move here. Full time." I laughed, disbelief flooding me. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I'm coming home. For good." That night, as we talked late into the morning, I felt something shift deep inside me. The distance that had once felt like an ocean suddenly felt like a bridge, one we were ready to cross together. When Ethan finally moved back, the reunion felt nothing like the first time we met. It was quieter, steadier, like two people who'd weathered storms and were ready to build something lasting. Now, as I sit here with Ethan curled up beside me, the city humming softly outside the window, I'm reminded of that night he came to inspect my apartment. How a simple visit turned into a complicated, beautiful journey. One that taught me about risk, about hope, and about the kind of love that's worth fighting for. Sometimes, life surprises you. Sometimes, the person who shows up unannounced is exactly who you've been waiting for all along. It's strange to think about how a simple apartment inspection set all this in motion. How a knock on my door led me here, sitting beside Ethan, the quiet hum of the city outside our window, matching the steady rhythm of our lives entwined. We've settled into a comfortable kind of normal now. Not perfect, of course. There are still mundane challenges. Work stress, bills, the occasional disagreement over which takeout place to order from. But those moments are small and fleeting compared to how much richer life feels with him around. One evening, not long after Ethan moved back for good, we found ourselves on that same balcony where he'd first asked the big question. The city lights stretched out endlessly, but their glow felt softer somehow, warmer than before. Ethan reached over and took my hand, just like he did the first time. Only this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. "I'm home," he said simply. And in that moment, I realized that home had been more than a place all along. It was wherever we chose to be together, whatever life we decided to build. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Me too." We stood there quietly, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. No grand declarations, no fireworks, just two people who had found something worth holding on to. Looking back, I get why the night he came to inspect my apartment felt so electric and strange. It was the start of something unexpected, something real. And that's the thing about love. It doesn't always show up on time or in ways you expect. Sometimes, it just knocks on your door when you least expect it, asking for more than rent. And if you're lucky, you open it wide enough to let it in.